Well, hello again, BookTube. I wanted to talk to you today about a novel that I just finished the other day, and it's from an author that, surprisingly, I've never read before up until now. I don't know. She's a really prolific author. I don't know why I've never gotten to reading any of her books. It's called Butcher by Joyce Carol Oates, and like I said, I'd never read this book before, but when this author before. But before I do that, I first wanted to talk to you about this goddamn heat. Um, I live in the United States, if you cannot tell, and we are in the midst of a record-breaking heat wave, and this has been the worst week of my life. If you cannot tell, I am much more conducive to winter weather. I generally hate the summer. A lot of people love summertime. I generally hate it because I just do not do well in hot weather. I get really fussy and grumpy, and I have been in a foul mood all week because of this freaking heat wave. Um, it's one of those heat waves where if you are outside for longer than 10 minutes, like you start to die. There's no other way around it. And I was walking across campus. I was outside walking for 5 minutes, and when I got into one of the air conditioned buildings, my entire back of my t-shirt was just sweating. I this has been the worst day of my life, and this has been the hottest day, and it's going to be just as hot tomorrow. And I would imagine at some point the surface of the sun is going to explode if it hasn't already. And so have been in a foul mood all week. But I did read this book. Joyce Carol Oates, Butcher, and I enjoyed this up until the ending. Believe you me, we will get to that. And so this novel came out in 2024. I think this is her most. I want to say this is her most recent novel, but I also feel like she's released another one since then. If she has, I haven't heard of it. But yeah, I had never read Joyce Carol Oates before. I got this at a used bookstore, so it was an old library copy, so it has that shiny uh, plastic covering on it. And here's our author looking all all stately and innocent. And this novel is the furthest from that. Um, if you've never heard of it, so it's about the early days of psychiatry. It's set in generally in the decades between the 1830s and the 1860s, and it's about mainly the themes of it are about the horrific medical experiments that were performed on asylum patients before they started to be treated like human beings, and it especially focuses on the way that women were treated, the way that indentured servants were treated, not slaves, but indentured servants, which she points out in the novel is basically the same thing. They were not seen as people; they were not seen as equals to regular American white people. But this follows a medical doctor named Silas Weir, and there was a lot of research that went into this novel that Joyce Carol Oates did, and you can tell through the ungodly amount of detail that is in this. So the Silas Weir character is based off of three different medical doctors who actually existed. One of them was a guy named Silas Weir. I believe he was the director of a lunatic asylum in New Jersey. I think it was Trenton, New Jersey. And that's actually where a lot of this novel is set as well. And it's also based off of two other medical doctors who I'm forgetting their names at this point, but it's not worth even mentioning their names because of the horrific things that they did, especially what they did to women. And so yeah, we follow this character Silas Weir as he gets his medical degree, and he takes over as the director of it was called the New Jersey Lunatic Asylum for Women, in Trenton, New Jersey. Again, based off of the actual lunatic asylum back in the 1850s. And this Silas Weir character, he becomes the founder of something that is called gynopsychiatry, which is basically psychiatry with a focus on women. And we pretty much follow his. A lot of it is told from his perspective, his first person perspective, from his sort of chronicles. I think it was called like Chronicles of a Physician's Life. And the way that this book is structured is pretty interesting. So it's set up as like a biography from Silas Weir's son, who who completely disapproves of everything that his father did, and so he collects everything from the chronicles, from this chronicle memoir that this doctor wrote, from his dad, the doctor wrote, and then he puts it into a book. And then there's another section of this book that is told from the perspective of one of Silas Weir's indentured servants. And so this Silas Weir guy, it's interesting how he starts out as a vaguely innocent medical doctor, and who even shriveled away at the sight of blood, or at the sight of whenever he had to medically examine women, if they had to undress at all, he was very, like, he would faint at the sight of blood, or at the sight of womanly parts, for lack of a better term. And we sort of see his evolution into this monster, which is what he is, and what the real Silas Weir and these two other doctors were. They were monsters, and he becomes the director of this asylum, and he takes a lot of these women who are considered indentured servants at the asylum, who they're not really asylum patients, but they are sort of like employees that work in like the latrines, work in the really scummy parts of the asylum. And to give you an idea, well, first of all, like, it is shocking to me, like, so I'm in grad school for mental health counseling, and it's amazing how far the field has come from this. This is a shocking look into how mental health was viewed at the time. Like, so much of it was, like, if you think that psychology and counseling now is filled with circus monkeys, and that it's a witch doctor sport, you have no idea how bad it used to be. And like, because so much of mental health and the way that psychiatrists and medical doctors thought at the time was they were still very religious, and they if you need another reason to hate Aristotle, these psychiatrists and medical doctors at the time, they believed that hysteria in women. So like at the time women were the only ones diagnosed with hysteria. That's a term that now hysteria is sort of taken out of the DSM. It's into something more dry and clinical now, when it doesn't focus solely on women. At the time, women were seen as, like, if you were a woman and you spoke back to your husband at all, or if you wanted to be educated, or if you did anything that was not relating to your womanly duties, such as popping out children and giving pleasure to your husband, then you were thrown into an asylum. You're mental, and then thrown in there. And so there were all of these women in this asylum for women, and this Silas Weir character, he starts experimenting on these women, doing this experimental surgery, and he becomes basically an expert in the female anatomy. I've learned I've learned more about the female anatomy in this book than I wish to. He talks about, like, I'm trying to figure out what I can say and not have this video taken down. A lot of intense medical issues that women have to deal with, and the horrific experiments he performs on them. Like I said, this is such a traumatizing book to read, and it also made me think of, like, if these doctors are doing this stuff to human beings, then you can only imagine what they do to animals. You can only imagine what they do to animals now. It's still, if you if you really want to be depressed, look up at the way that the way that the United States military uses dogs in their medical experiments, especially in their artillery experiments. But yeah, I mean, this Silas Weir, he's pretty much an American like Joseph Mengele. Um, just casual cruelty. He turns into this. I mean, he's a psychopath, and he develops this god complex. He wants everybody in the hospital to refer to him like as master, and he develops a particular fondness for one of the patients that he had that he eventually turns into one of his nursing staff, and and just the way that he talks about women, especially if you need any other reason to hate Aristotle, so much of what these psychiatrists did, they based it off of the work of Aristotle. Aristotle had this view of the reason that hysteria and mental illness is so much more prevalent in women is because of the theory that Aristotle developed of the wandering uterus, which is that if there's too much blood flow going to the brain, so they used to think that if you learned, then there was more blood flow to your brain. Well, with women, if you had more blood flow to your brain, then your uterus would detach and travel throughout your body, and if that gets to your heart or your lungs or God forbid to your brain, then that can just destroy you and kill you. Um, you need more reason to hate Aristotle or think he was an idiot. And so, yeah, I could read you quotes from this book. Which, if you've read this book, then you know what I'm talking about. Um, I enjoyed it. I think it really straddles the line of good writing, as far as like good writing when it comes to these horrific, I guess it's called body horror, these torture scenes. It borders on that good writing and like torture porn, uh, if that makes any sense. Like, there's a reason why Joyce Carol Oates wrote this the way that she did, the way that she spares no detail at all in this story. Um, but it really borders on like just you becoming desensitized to it, especially the later into the book you get. And the only thing I disliked about this, which I liked, this is maybe 350 pages. I liked it up until the epilogue, up until the ending. I don't know if this is what Steve Donahue talks about, where the author just completely phones it in on the ending. He or she gets up and walks away from the table, but that's what Joyce Carol Oates did here. Um, the ending is shriekingly unbelievable, which, like, you're told the ending at the very beginning of the book, so I'm not spoiling anything. Basically, what just infuriated me was what happens to Silas Weir spoiler alert, whenever the patients mutiny and they basically get a hold of him and do all the things that they do to him. There is no possible way he could have lived through it. He could have lived through that. No possible way. But when we get to the epilogue, we find out that he escaped with like serious injuries, but not deadly injuries. That drove me insane. Not just because I wanted the Silas Weir character to die, which, of course, if you have any empathy at all, you want this person to die. But it's the fact that the stuff that the patients do to him, you do not live through that. Very clearly, you don't live through it. And then the epilogue just gets more and more fanciful, and then eventually it just sort of stops. It's like a Stephen King ending. It just sort of stops halfway through a sentence. And so that really sort of destroyed my enjoyment for the rest of this book, because it was good. I was enjoying it all the way up until then. It won't deter me from reading any more of Joyce Carol Oates' books, but it is definitely this book is definitely a stain on my memory now because of that ending. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to talk to you about. It's an eye-opening book, and if you're interested in like mental health and the history of mental health and psychology, psychiatry, it would benefit you to read this book. Joyce Carol Oates did do a lot of research for this. You can tell, at least I think you can tell on the page, and so uh, I don't know what this review or book discussion was, but I at least wanted to talk to you about it, and so. Uh, and I know that I would be breaking Eric Carl Anderson's heart by saying that this book sucked, but by the ending it sucked, and I don't worry about hurting his feelings. I worry more about hurting this woman's feelings because, based on the contents of this book, I wouldn't want to cross her. Um, but anyway, that's sort of my discussion of this book. So hopefully you enjoyed it.